And we are back. This is episode number 65 of Calibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. I'm going to do something a little different today. I'm actually going to go in depth on a specific topic, something that has been sort of frustrating for me in the information space right now, especially the pro Ukrainian information space. There's a lot of this weird talk. It's like, cope. I mean, I don't really know how to explain it. That the counteroffensive isn't going particularly well, so there's a lot of backtracking, a lot of finger pointing and blaming from a lot of the analysts on Twitter. I put that in quotes. I put myself in those quotes as well. Analyst. I do my best, but I'm no expert. I'm no professional, and these other people are. I mean, in fairy tale land. So analysts is the best way I can describe them. People who claim themselves to be analysts, but really are just on the wrong end of the spectrum. Have been blaming the West for not delivering enough equipment to Ukraine, have been blaming NATO for not letting Ukraine conduct this offensive in the way that they want, the way that they know how. Making judgments from the sideline and so on. It really is. The narrative is starting to shift in a weird way where now it's going to finger pointing and blaming, and it's just very odd. So we have people like Defmon, who's 200,000 plus Twitter account. He is coming out and saying that the Russians are being heavily attrited in the Ukrainian counteroffensive or offensive. I should just say it's an offensive because that's what it is. In the south in Zaporozhye, the southern district, the southern grouping of the Russians is being so heavily attrited by this Ukrainian offensive. And I just wanted to go into depth on that a little bit. All of these first off, when you're reading all of this, you should take a step back and say, well, what perspective is this coming from? Where is this coming from? If you look back 3 months, we're getting close to 90 days into this counteroffensive, so 3 months roughly. And the Ukrainians have made very little progress. I'm going to put up some maps right now just so you can kind of get some an idea of how far the Ukrainians have gone. So here's the front line around Mala Tokmaka, down to Robotyne, and it is roughly, the Ukrainian advance here has been roughly, I'm going to go ahead and say 8 kilometers. I'm going to give them the extra distance. That is from the highway south of Malatokmak all the way to Robotyne, which I'm going to go ahead and just say has been captured. I think it's still contested, or majority in the gray zone. There's no houses left, so it's in the gray zone. The Russians might have some control in the southern end, but just for this, I'm going to go ahead and give the Ukrainians Robotyne. And by the way, all of these maps that I will be using come from Deep State UA, which is the probably the most accurate and most trusted UA map maker, updates on their maps. So that's the map I'm going to be using. Go follow them. They have an excellent mapping. They're a little biased towards Ukraine, obviously, but I'm going to use them as the source. So I'm not using, Russian sources and whatever. This is neutral sources that nobody considers to be neutral. They're pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian. There's not a lot of neutrality left anymore in the information space. So anyway, from that highway down to Robotyne is about 8 kilometers, is what I said. So they have captured 8 kilometers in this salient in about 3 months of offensive actions. That's not a lot. That's not great. We also have offensive actions on the Vermisky Ledge. That is around the Donetsk-Zaporozhye border. Here's the before, and here's the after. In this area, I think it's been around 10 kilometers have been taken. I didn't do the measurements here because I'm not going to talk about this area. It's not really the primary focus anymore. The fighting is sort of not moving in this area as much as it was. I don't know if the Ukrainians are waiting for something here. This area does not yield a lot of beneficial strategic results for the Ukrainian counteroffensive. There's no real big towns to the south of this to capture, no important logistics hubs. If they push down through this area, it's mostly just going to be pushing along a few highways or, large roads and open fields. So it's kind of a no-go. So I'm just going to focus on Robotyne, which is the primary focus of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. It's where everybody predicted the Ukrainians were going to push the hardest because it's the natural path to get down to Tokmak and then over to Melitopol or up to the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant or down to the Sea of Azov, whichever direction the Ukrainians want to go. So that's the primary goal. And before we get into this, I'm going to put up a map first that shows the defensive fortifications, and then I'm going to go ahead and explain these defensive fortifications. So here's that first map. You can see the defensive fortifications. Some of them have actually been passed by the Ukrainians around Robotyne. And here is the second picture where I'm going to label these. So this blue area right here, this blue curved line, is going to be what I call the security zone. This is where the Russians do not have their first line of defense. They do have defensive areas here, and they have designed this area to slow down and bog the Ukrainian offensive down. So that's the blue. And just to the south of that, you can see that first red line. That is the actual first line of defense. It is a continuous line of trench networks and, anti-tank ditches and dragon's teeth. So obstacles for tanks and armored vehicles. And then just to the south of that, you can see the yellow line, which is the, quote unquote, second line of defense. These aren't, all continuous lines. They're just like these long, on a map, at least it looks like a line. So you would call it a defensive line. It's a fallback position, right? If there's a breach in any part of this front, you could fall back to that next line. And then around Tokmak is the final bastion of defense for that city. So you're looking at a security zone, two full established lines of defense, and then one defense around the city entirely. So this area is heavily fortified by the Russians, and they are just sitting in trenches and relying on their drones and artillery to do most of the fighting. A lot of times in these Ukrainian assaults, they won't even make it to contact with the Russians. They push in, they get hit by artillery, and they're forced to retreat. It's very common that this happens. So that's kind of how the offensive looks. And that's what the Ukrainians are looking to overcome. So I showed you the map of the 8 kilometers. I'll put it up here again, just so to remind you. Here it is, from the highway south of Tokmak down to Robotyne. And I'm going to zoom out so you guys can get just a little bit of perspective on this. Here's Tokmak, the first major strategic objective of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. It is from the south end of Robotyne, which is being very gracious to say the Ukrainians are actually at that location and that's their starting point. All the way down to the city is 22.68 kilometers. That's what my rough mapping estimate gives me for the distance. But let's just say 20. So the city of Tokmak, the most important first big strategic goal of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, secure this city. After this city, there's almost no more defenses. The Russians are going to be on the back foot and you're going to have freedom to maneuver, right? That is over double the distance that the Ukrainians have captured through the security zone, not even through the first lines of defense, in the first 90 days of this counteroffensive. If anybody has been following this conflict, we've seen 3 seasonal periods actually now, where Ukraine goes through an incredibly wet time period. The earth there becomes liquid, basically. There's 10 feet of black dirt in Ukraine that makes crops easy to plant, easy to grow, and great to harvest. It is a breadbasket. But that dirt basically turns into liquid when it gets wet. It's just mud. It's horrible. This is something that the Germans experienced in, World War II. Plenty of armies have gone through this. It is a nightmare. It is a natural defense, and it basically means that during two separate times of the year, spring and late fall, there can be almost no offensive operations with heavy armor. Everything just gets stuck. It's an absolute nightmare. It's horrible. So that is approaching. That is fast approaching. The Ukrainians have gone 8 kilometers in roughly 90 days. They're looking at maybe 50 days, 40, 50, 60 days left. So not even as much time as they've had to make some sort of gains before they are absolutely restricted to roads, which is not a good idea for an offensive, sending armored columns down roads when your enemy has drones and glide bombs and all that stuff is just not the place. So the offensive actions will come to an end, and the Ukrainians need to make success. But they're looking at 22 kilometers to Tokmak. So over double what they've already done. They have less time and less trained manpower and equipment, right? The Ukrainians have already gone through the 9th Corps. They're going through the 10th Corps right now. They have used the 82nd Mechanized. They've used up the 42nd Mechanized. The 14th Artillery Brigade that's supporting the 82nd has been heavily attrited. We've seen multiple M109s get destroyed, multiple howitzers get destroyed, like truck-towed howitzers, M777s and the like. So the Ukrainians are taking some serious attrition. If you believe the Russian numbers, the Ukrainian offensive has, resulted in around 50,000 casualties. Take that with a grain of salt. Obviously, it's the Russian MOD. We can only estimate, but let's just say 30,000 people have died or have been killed or seriously wounded. They won't be returning to action within 3 months, right? That is half of the Ukrainian offensive force that was designated for this offensive, 60,000 men. So the Ukrainians have taken some serious attrition. Now, the claim, like Defmont made that I posted up earlier, I might post it up here again, is basically saying that the Russians are somehow taking far more attrition in this offensive action. I would like to just back it up a little bit right here. When the Ukrainians were in Bakhmut on the defensive, the claim was that the Ukrainians were attriting the Russians at 3-1 because the Russians were attacking. Now, anybody who knows this conflict in any depth knows that that's just a complete nonsense number. 1-1 is maybe more likely, but even then, I think that's extremely high. If anybody remembers, it was PMC Wagner that was in Bakhmut. So they didn't really even have that many men. The Ukrainian losses were substantial trying to hold this. Russia has the aviation advantage, the drone advantage, and the artillery advantage. So you add all of those things up, you add up how the actual Battle of Bakhmut went, and it's pretty clear to see that the Ukrainians handily lost. They held on to it for far too long. They wasted a lot of trained manpower, a lot of very good trained manpower in the city trying to hold it. It was their fortress. It was the hill that they chose to die on, and they suffered for it. And I think this offensive right now is suffering for it. They could have probably bumped it up to 90,000 men if they wouldn't have held Bakhmut for as long as they did. But that's what they chose to do. And then, the counteroffensive was delayed. Bakhmut ended in May, I think. They held it until May. That's when the counteroffensive should have been starting. May, late May. Then it had to be delayed until early June, and it gave the Russians so much time to get these mobilized men in, get all this armor in, and so on. So Tokmak probably isn't happening. But I'm just going to zoom out the map again and show you what this looks like on a oblast size scale. So if anybody knows, the territories in Ukraine are titled oblasts. And we can see from Melitopol to Mariupol right now, the entire Zaporozhye Oblast, some of Donetsk Oblast, and some of Kherson Oblast. That little arrow right there, that blue little arrow, is the entirety of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. in this area toward, Robotny south. It looks really good on that first map, but then you zoom out and it's like, oh, really? That many people have died. That many brigades have been used. Like an army corps has been degraded. A second army corps has been brought in. That was supposed to be the exploitation brigade or corps that went in after the breakthrough corps, which was the 9th. So that's kind of depressing. But let's zoom out one more time and you can really see how little has been achieved, how far they have to go, and how daunting that task is. This unbelievable denial that some of these commentators are in, and some of the pro-Ukrainian supporters, the really hardcore pro-Ukrainians. There's big accounts like Senate Defender, it's Oz, Ozent Defender. He is a very neutral source, I would say. He is pro-Ukrainian, but he covers the conflict extremely well. If anybody has anybody that they would like to follow on that side, he's the guy. You might not agree with everything he says or the way he presents it, but he's very fair and extremely good at what he does. I'm jealous of how balanced and big he is and how well he presents his information. The only people he pisses off are the ideologically driven crazies in NAFO and stuff like that. So, he does a really good job if anybody's looking for somebody to follow there. But as you can see, this counteroffensive has not yielded the proper results. And to make a claim that the southern military district is being attrited, when they were attacking in Bakhmut, the Russians were said to have been taking heavier attrition. Okay, that's fine. Let's just agree on that. And if you say something about it's urban warfare or whatever, that's just not the case, because that only works when you're approaching the city. Once you're in the city, yes, casualties are high, but they're high for both sides. You both have to be in the city together. And the Russians have more artillery. So more shells falling on the Ukrainians means more casualties. And we saw that. Now let's go to the south. The Russians are in trenches, fortified positions, sitting, waiting for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians don't always know where they're at, but the Russians always know where the Ukrainians are at. They have drones up all the time, watching all of their movements. Does this mean that the Russians are not taking attrition in this area? Absolutely not. They are. They are taking attrition. However, the attrition levels that they are sustaining are tenable. They can keep doing this for basically forever. The military industrial complex in Russia is able to support this. The manpower issue does not seem to exist anymore. So Russia can sustain these losses. Ukraine is not replacing what it is losing right now. They're going to have to go on another begging tour here, get a bunch more tanks, armored vehicles, and I guess trained manpower from who knows where. Their army is starting to look very old, but you have these Ukrainians walking across open fields against Russian artillery advantage, Russian aviation advantage, Russian drone advantage, and Russian positioning advantage. The Ukrainians are walking into fire bags. How is it even conceptually possible that the Russians are sustaining higher attrition than the Ukrainians? They're not. It's just not happening. That is a completely illogical position to take. It doesn't add up. It doesn't pass the lightest sniff test. So the Ukrainians are hurting in the southern front. They are not achieving their goals. Western media is starting to turn its back. We had I think it was the Austrian military. They do pretty good reporting on this. They came out and talked about the issues that the counteroffensive is having and how it's probably not going to succeed. People are blaming the fact that F-16s weren't delivered, which F-16s are not good for Ukraine in general in this kind of war, and they would not have made any difference. You could have got 40 F-16s, which is not going to happen, and the war effort is not going to go any better for them. It has nothing to do with planes. It has nothing to do with munitions, maybe outside of not having enough artillery shells. But I mean, like ATACMs, those sort of things. The Taurus, which is basically a cruise missile based around the Storm Shadow. It's the same like basic design. So none of that would have made a difference. The only thing that would have made a difference is more manpower, more time, and a Russian army that wasn't willing to fight. I've said it multiple times. I think the Ukrainians and NATO thought that the Russians were going to run like they normally do, giving up space for time, and then they just didn't. They fought in the security zone, and the Ukrainians still have not made it through that security zone. I think they're going to continue fighting there because it's working so successfully for them. But yeah, that's just what I wanted to kind of get on here and rant about. It was not super important, but it was something that's been bugging me, and I thought it would make, at least an entertaining video. If you guys want to support me, I have my Patreon that's now live. So go check that out. I'll put the link in this description. I forgot to do it on the last video, but it doesn't matter. Do not support me if, like, take care of yourselves first. I'm not in a desperate situation. I just like donating money to people that provide entertainment for me. The Duran, other YouTube pages, History Legends. I watch their videos daily. So if you like my videos, you like my content, you want me to do more of it, and you want it to, it's my content's always going to be free. So don't worry about that. But on my Patreon, I'm going to be doing 2 exclusive episodes on there. With fun guests is what I'm going to try to do. It won't be as much Ukraine updates. There will be Ukraine stuff, definitely. But if you want to be a part of that, I implore you to go join my Patreon. Thank you so much, everybody. Follow me on Twitter and Telegram as well for updates on all my videos and just updates on the Ukraine war. Thank you guys so much, and have a good day.